Thousands of years before Darth Bane's Sith Order rose to dominate the galaxy, Darth Revan ruled over a Sith Empire of his own, waging the Second Sith War or Jedi Civil War that nearly destroyed the Jedi Order and Old Republic government. Yet in 3957 BBY, Revan was betrayed by his apprentice Darth Malak, who took over leadership of their Sith Empire. A former Jedi hero who saved their people from a terrible Mandalorian invasion, Revan survived this betrayal and returned to the light side, once again saving the galaxy, this time by killing Darth Malak and shattering the empire he helped build. After the war, Revan disappeared for many years to undertake a vital mission searching for the true Sith in the unknown regions, while the remnants of his Sith army scattered and fell to infighting, allowing the Old Republic to regain control over much of the galaxy. Yet the legacy of Revan Sith Empire was not yet lost, as 3 powerful Sith Lords soon emerged to take the mantle of leadership for themselves. Once a powerful Jedi Master and historian, Traya spent so much time meditating and seeing through the Force, she lost the use of her eyesight and did not bother correcting the issue. A controversial figure on the very edges of respectability within the Order, Traya constantly challenged her students with questions that made them think outside the bounds of standard light side dogma. Though her free-thinking beliefs were tolerated for a time, she fell under great scrutiny when many of her students, including her most prized pupil Revan, left the Jedi Order to wage an unauthorized war against the Mandalorian invaders, wreaking havoc upon the Republic. Although their cause was just, the severity of the war and merciless tactics necessary for victory caused many of these Jedi to embrace the dark side. Exiled from the Order for her part in their training, Traya felt a Force echo calling her to Malachor 5, and so arrived shortly after it was destroyed by the mass shadow generator superweapon used by Revan's forces to win a final victory in the Mandalorian Wars. This enormous loss of life was so devastating it created a wound in the Force, meaning a point of weakness within the interconnected fabric of Force energy spread across the galaxy. As a result, locations with a wound in the Force teemed with echoes of pain and suffering, which interfered with the regular flow of energy in that region. Often these echoes could be heard by powerful Force sensitives, even from great distances, which was what drew Traya to the planet, where she encountered a contingent of Sith assassins within the Traya Sith Academy. Yet they did not attack her, instead presenting her with ancient documents called the Truths of the Cosmos, containing their history and secrets of the dark side, possibly written by pure-blood descendants of the Sith people. Immersed in dark teachings while surrounded by dark energies, Traya quickly fell to the dark side, coming to the alarming conclusion that the Force itself was the enemy, as it had a will it imposed upon individuals, forcing them down a predestined path rather than letting them choose for themselves. While other Sith attempted to dominate the Force and liberate themselves from its will, Traya sought to free the entire galaxy from this enslavement, believing Force wounds were the key, as echoes within these wounds could potentially create the interference necessary to deafen individuals from this primordial energy. Following in the footsteps of her apprentice Revan, Darths Traya proclaimed herself Dark Lord of the Sith, reopening the Traya Academy and reuniting many of the scattered remnants of the Sith Order, thereby creating a power base to facilitate her plans. Searching for other wounds in the Force for study, Traya eventually found 2 powerful Sith Lords with great potential and unique abilities, bringing them to Malachor where they trained as her most prized students. The most powerful of the 3, the man later called Nihilus, lost everything during the Mandalorian Wars, and was present on Malachor when the superweapon was activated. Feeling all the pain and suffering endured by those who died, his body was ravaged by a wound in the Force created within him that caused an intense hunger, leaving him sick and in constant pain. Encountering other survivors, he unknowingly started to drain them of their life force, and in doing so, temporarily satiated the hunger, granting him a measure of peace. Yet this discovery was more curse than blessing, as he needed more energy with every feeding, while the temporary relief it offered grew less and less. Therefore, when he was approached by Darths Traya and offered a chance to drain entire planets, he accepted the opportunity and entered the Traya Academy. Joining Nihilus was Sion, a longtime Sith Lord who served as a marauder under Exar Kun during the Great Sith War of 3996 BBY. Developing an enormous tolerance for pain, which he used to fuel his dark side powers, Sion was convinced he could not be killed, as even when he was struck down, he could embrace the pain and fuel his own resuscitation, eventually requiring him to hold his scattered, decomposing body parts together through a constant flow of dark side power. Although this made him near invincible, it also meant he lived in unending agony, ever eager to unleash his wrath upon an enemy. Following the defeat of Exar Kun, Sion next joined the Sith Empire of Revan and Malak, only to once again face bitter defeat. After the death of Malak, Sion went to the Sith Academy on Korriban, only to find the remaining Sith fighting for dominance, ending with everyone dead or fleeing the planet. Sion was then found by Traya and brought to the Traya Academy. Hoping their unique conditions would help in her greater mission, Darths Traya taught them all she could, but both Sion and Nihilus proved poor students. Nihilus ultimately cared nothing for the Sith, Jedi, or Force, as draining worlds and satiating his hunger was his sole focus. Sion was similarly difficult, as he was too angry and impatient to learn anything outside physical combat and force attacks, with both entirely uninterested in more philosophical teachings. Nevertheless, they were both powerful Sith Lords who completed their training and joined Darth Traya, the Lord of Betrayal, as Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, and Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain, to become the Sith Triumvirate, united by their desire to unleash devastation upon the Jedi and Republic. Launching the Dark Wars, problems arose almost immediately as Nihilus and Sion grew impatient with Traya's more measured, strategic thinking in service to greater ambitions and long-term goals, instead seeking to take the fight directly to the enemy, regardless of any other considerations. Therefore, Sion and Nihilus betrayed their master and severed her connection to the Force before exiling her from the Order. With Traya gone, Sion and Nihilus began the First Jedi Purge, each operating independently, though remaining in a loose alliance. Ever seeking to satisfy his hunger, Darth Nihilus went from world to world, devouring the Force energy of all living beings, while Darth Sion worked with Sith assassins to murder individual Jedi. With their people disappearing and feeling a disturbance in the Force, 100 Jedi attended a meeting on Qatar where the issue was to be discussed. Yet they were betrayed by Master Atris, who was falling to the dark side through her study of Sith artifacts, leading her to feel justified in informing the Sith of what was happening in order to orchestrate a confrontation where the Jedi would defeat the Dark Lord. Yet she vastly underestimated their enemy's power, with Darth Nihilus draining the entire planet of Force energy, killing all living beings, save for Visamar, a native Miraluka woman who the Dark Lord spared and took as his slave/apprentice, creating a Force bond between them. Although she suffered a slight setback in exile from the Triumvirate, Traya, returning to her persona as Traya, was pleased to see her former students making progress, as the death of the Jedi was a necessary step in her continuously evolving plans. Yet the Sith also had to be struck down, and so she sought out yet another apprentice, encountering a fellow Jedi exile named Mitra Surik, who would prove to be her last, best hope for victory against the Force. A former Jedi who left the Order to serve as Revan's third-in-command during the Mandalorian Wars. It was Mitra Surik, acting on Revan's order, who activated the Mass Shadow Generator which destroyed Malachor V. Utterly overwhelmed by the echoes of pain and suffering felt through the Force, Mitra, like Nihilus, became a wound in the Force. Yet whereas Nihilus grew more dependent on this energy to survive, Mitra instinctively cut herself off from the Force, allowing the echoes of pain within her to create a distortion field that deafened her to this primordial energy. When it was over, her mind started to block out the truth of what just happened, and her overwhelming sense of guilt made her the only one of Revan's followers to surrender themselves to the Jedi Council. Although many resented her for playing such an important role in this disaster, the greater concern surrounded the echoes emanating from her Force wound. Though some wanted to forgive and study her, others, like Jedi Master Atris, believed her past dark side leanings could not be forgiven. Yet what most concerned them was that her condition, inflicted from a dark side event, may represent a threat to the very Order itself, as Jedi were taught to give in to the will of the Force, while Mitra was entirely devoid of its influence, blocking it out with echoes of pain and suffering. Therefore, Mitra Surik was sentenced to exile, causing her to leave Republic space for the Outer Rim. Exiled for years, she eventually heard about Jedi being killed and returned to Republic space, only to be attacked by Darth Sion. However, she survived the encounter thanks to Traya, who rescued Mitra, established a Force bond, and became her new master, seeking to retrain her in the ways of the Force. This would be significant, as Mitra was already cut off from the will of the Force, meaning she would be able to channel this energy without being bound to its influence. Traya was eager to train this new student, as she was yet another wound in the Force, who, unlike Nihilus, seemed to possess the exact qualities needed to accomplish her greater plans. This Force bond also allowed Traya to regain her own powers, increasing in strength alongside her apprentice. In addition to training under Traya, Mitra sought out other surviving Jedi, and in the process gathered a group of loyal companions, many of whom were Force-sensitive, and/or formerly served under Revan, including the pilot Atten Rand, the engineer Baldur, the Achani handmaiden Brianna, the Jedi disciple Mikkel, the Mandalorian bounty hunter Mira, the apprentice of Nihilus Visamar, the Mandalorian leader Kendaris Ordo, also known as Mandalore the Preserver, the utility droid T3M4, the crime boss droid Goto, and assassin droid HK-47. Possessing a natural ability to create force bonds, it was through Mitra's connection to those around her that she could once again learn to channel the force while remaining cut off from its call. Surviving an encounter with Darths Sion at the Paragus mining facility, Mitra had another near miss with Sion on Korriban, where she sought to liberate a captured Jedi only to find her already dead. She then faced the agents of Darth Nihilus on Onderon and its moon Duxon, where Sith-allied rebels fought a civil war to overthrow the Republic-allied queen. While helping the Loyalists defend their government, Traya took advantage of the situation to start the final steps of her grand plan by saving the enemy general's second-in-command, Colonel Tobin, in order to inform him that the last of the Jedi were gathered on the planet Telos 4, when in reality only Atris and her Jedi Academy were present. She spoke this lie, knowing full well he would relay the information to Darth Nihilus, who then targeted the planet. Meanwhile, Mitra finished helping her allies on Onderon and Duxon before meeting with several of the last surviving Jedi Masters on Dantooine. At this meeting, the Jedi were appalled by her ability to wield the Force without being bound to its will, as it meant she was affected by Malachor in the same way as Nihilus, though to a lesser degree, meaning she was slowly draining the life force of her followers and those around her to fuel her powers. As a wound in the Force, Mitra fed off those she killed and recruited to her cause, made worse by her talent for Force bonds, ensuring a steady supply of companions to consume. Therefore, the Jedi sentenced her once again to exile, but this time they would sever her connection to the Force entirely, prompting Traya to emerge and save her by draining the Masters of their powers. Ever eager to prove her philosophy correct by demonstrating that Mitra Surik was thriving even without a direct connection to the Force, it was possible Traya had some hope these last Jedi would listen to the exile and try to learn from her experiences, but this was shattered when they proved unwilling to move beyond their old beliefs. Seeing them strike out against her apprentice, Traya used the opportunity to give the Masters a final lesson and choice, wielding Force Drain to extract their life energies, thereby putting them in a similar position to Mitra Surik at the Battle of Malachor. Yet while the exile survived her crisis by cutting herself off from the Force, the Jedi were so dependent on it they could not do the same and died from the attack. Leaving Mitra unconscious on the ground, Traya, now Darth Traya once more, left to meet with Atris on Telos, causing the exile to follow when she recovered. Though Traya was no longer there, Surik confronted Atris, who by this point had fully embraced the dark side, but convinced her to return to the light. Atris then revealed Traya was waiting on Malachor, yet before the exile could depart, her former master arranged for a final confrontation with Darth Nihilus in the Battle of Telos 4. Boarding his ship the Ravager, Mitra Surik and her companions defeated the Dark Lord, thanks to a distraction caused by his apprentice Visamar, who exploited her force bond and mental connection to her master. After his death, Visamar took his mask and looked upon his face, before the body disappeared in a burst of dark side energy. Traveling to Malachor, Mitra learned Traya was once again Dark Lord of the Sith, with Darth Sion under her command. Though Mitra defeated Sion several times, his abilities meant he kept coming back from the dead, determined to prove himself worthy of Traya's approval until the exile finally convinced him he could not win, and to at last let go of his torturous existence, becoming one with the Force. Arriving at the heart of the Trayus Academy, Mitra Surik found Darth Traya, who was ready to enact the final part of her plan. Having studied the exile during her training, Traya came to the realization that after using Mitra Surik to wipe out the remaining Jedi and Sith, she could kill her on Malachor, where her Force wound originated, thus unleashing the Force echoes within her, so they might clash with the echoes already present on the planet, thereby creating a reverberating effect that could be felt across the galaxy, deafening all living beings from the will of the Force, thereby achieving her greatest dream. Yet much to Traya's surprise, she actually grew to admire and respect the exile, considering her the greatest student she ever taught, as she was the living embodiment of all her ideals. Therefore, now that the time had finally come to complete her mission, Traya felt prepared to face both victory and defeat. In the end, Mitra Surik won the duel and proved more powerful, thereby ending Traya's plan to deafen the galaxy to the Force. Yet even in defeat, Traya was satisfied, as it meant she was ultimately proven correct in all her beliefs, since the most powerful person to emerge from both the Jedi and Sith orders was someone who could channel the Force but was free from its influence. In the end, she truly loved Mitra Surik and was willing to sacrifice the future of the entire galaxy to see her succeed. Before she died, Traya revealed to the exile that her followers would rebuild the Jedi Order, but she must leave it all behind and follow the path of Revan to face the true Sith waiting in the unknown regions. Informing the exile that she knew about Revan and his fight against the true Sith, it meant that perhaps there was yet another layer to all Traya had accomplished, as her motivations for enacting this grand plan may not only have been to liberate the galaxy from the will of the Force, but also to cut off the true Sith from their source of power, thereby preventing their inevitable invasion. Thus ended the Dark Wars and reign of the Sith Triumvirate, yet their legacy lived on in many ways throughout the years that followed, with Darth Traya's teachings continuing to have a great influence on Mitra Surik, who went on to find Revan and ultimately helped him defeat the true Sith Emperor. As for Darth Nihilus, his story became legendary throughout the galaxy, seeing his mask and holocron become precious relics of great value, with his holocron eventually ending up in the possession of Darth Krayt by 137 ABY. Though Darth Sion did not attain the same level of fame and status as Traya and Nihilus, he was nonetheless a remarkably powerful Sith Lord, worshipped as a god by a Keldor dark-side cult on the planet Doran. A special thanks to all those who contribute to Civilization X, like Tio the Iron Banker, Sir Xavier Defender of the Flame, Edengruir Spicy Sky Frugran, and Captain Marvel the MB MSC. If you'd like to help the channel, please give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/civilizationx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.